Hello and welcome all back to Election Time News America. Today is Friday, June 20th, 2025, and we're going to, of course, be looking at the 2026 elections again, just because there's always something interesting coming up in the midterms, and we're going to be going over a lot more of the logistics of the overall comparison to 2018 and 2020. Sorry, into 2022. Election Time News, your one-stop for all things elections and politics, from summations to poll reviews and news. Subscribe below for more content about American, Canadian, and Australian elections. I will be getting to the Tasmanian elections very soon. Also, make sure to follow the Substack. Remember, there's never a dull moment in politics. So now on to the video. First off, I am going to be making the continuation of the 2016 election alt-hist scenario, the 2017 elections that will be coming out. I'm not sure when. I don't have a timetable for that, but that is in fact officially going to be set in motion. That is going to be a series as well as some other alt-hist scenarios. There were some suggested in the comments there, so I will be getting to some of those. Those will probably take a while. Not as long now, as I am on summer vacation from school right now, so I have quite a bit more time, but once school year starts up again, it will definitely take a lot longer. But anyway, on to the video now. Here is the overall overview. I do not have anything set up yet. This is my sheet that eventually one day my predictions will all be hosted on, and they'll actually be generally mathematically based, not just guesses and checks and such from myself like they were for the 2024 cycle, even though those weren't that inaccurate. I could probably go through and actually compare exactly what happened to the results and such, but it's a bit late for that now. So, anyway, here we have the PVI for each state that I have a calculator for right here, and I've gone over before. So it varies a good bit across the entire country. The PVI is the short for Partisan Voting Index, which is how the state would expect to be voting compared to the nation. And so we have values in here ranging from negative 86 to positive 53. So negative 86 is going to be Washington, D.C., and positive 56 is, I'm not sure where, I think positive 53, which is going to be Nebraska's third district. So there's a lot of things that are involved in here, from the demographics, which is going to be based off of the percentage of the population that is white, percentage of the population that has a college degree or more, and then the median age. And so those are going to be the main three demographics that can easily be a binary decision, or whether or not they're more likely to vote or not Democratic or Republican. And then we have the last few cycles. Why did I include 24, 2016, 12, and 8? Well, because of the algorithm I had, it goes basically incrementally. And so this is the smallest one that would be worth more than 10% weighted. So anything less than that is less than 10%, which is going to be relatively small weight. So, and there we also have trends, which is mostly what that's about, and also for the weighted result and weighted nationals, really what it's going to be about. And so from there we get the raw PVI, which is then stylized, which so it looks nice. But here is the actual PVI per state. So that's how the overall system works. That's going to be here for the presidency. Eventually, I'm going to get to this, but the number one priority is going to be the gubernatorial, since that's obviously going to be the ones later this year. But I have a bit more research to be doing on some of this stuff. And also be starting AP Stat this year, so that will also help a good bit as well. So, but this is just the baseline here. I don't have anything for the 2026 page other than the Senate, because I only have one page for governors, and it is obviously 2025 right now, so that's going to be the 2025 page. I'll work on making a second one so that we can look ahead for midterms and such. That probably would make some sense. So, with all that in mind, we do have a lot of governors up in 2026. You can see this nice long list here. Every single one other than these three, I believe that's 8 and then 11, and then 2 more which are going up this year. Now, the statistically most likely possibility as of right now for these two races is that Democrats win both of them, so that is the assumption here for the governors right here, is that Democrats have won both of them, which means it's going to be 6-8, and at this point in time. So let's start things off. We're going to start with the more important Senate. This is obviously going to be much more important, as keeping control of the Senate by the Republicans is going to determine whether or not Donald Trump can continue to have less opposition to his choices, his overall agenda. That was the word I was looking for. His agenda will be much easier to pass if he can continue to work out with a cooperative Senate, which is absolutely the case right now, as the Republicans have 53 seats after flipping for West Virginia, which was completely expected. But then they also got Montana, which is pretty likely. Uh, Ohio, which was a little bit of a surprise, but the big surprise was Pennsylvania flipping by just under 1/4%, which was only 15,000 votes against longtime incumbent Bob Casey Jr. So that got the Senate to 53 to 47, but we are now going to see how things will end up going from there. The Democrats actually end up starting off with a surplus here, 34 to 31, but a lot of these seats are Republican held. As you can see here, the Democrats started with 35, the Republicans with 30, but then they have 15 safe seats if we want to carry those over. This is actually turning out better than 2020, for example, so some of them are definitely changing. Um, so just to start off there, not all of these are exactly the same. Like, for example, now Colorado is actually going to be a likely state to start, even though we have a year out. Meanwhile, New Mexico is going to be lean. All of these, because we have so much time left, there's a lot more uncertainty, which means that we're going to be putting these a lot further down the scale than they are actually likely to be on election day. But it's because we're working with probabilities. If we were to go off of margins, then things would change, but we are too far out to work with margins as of right now. So start things off, we have the safe states, which there are not many. The Democrats, we have the state of Oregon. Now, this one is pretty consistent. Actually, before we start that real quick, I'm going to go over here to the overall map. We can see there's quite a few retirements here. Alabama, that's a retirement there. McConnell in Kentucky, and then we have Gene Shaheen in New Hampshire, Dick Durbin in Illinois. I blank on these names. Gary Peters in Michigan, and then we also have Tina Smith in Minnesota. All of those basically are being Democratic incumbents in relatively competitive states. All three of these states, Kamala Harris got less than Donald Trump won Michigan, but in all three of them, Kamala Harris got under 51% of the vote in. So they're already not starting off with a very strong base there, even just to start that off with. So that's a potential concern here. But then the states that the Republicans have retired from, that's going to be Kentucky and Alabama, both of which Donald Trump got more than 64% and just under 2/3 of the vote. So there's no concern there. He actually won both by 30.5%. On the nose, 633,000, 690,000, and that's just because of size. But so those are both safe. Meanwhile, these ones are much more competitive, which means that it's going to be a bit more difficult for the Democratic Party to be able to hold on to them. So those are going to be difficult for the Democratic Party. Meanwhile, Illinois is basically completely safe. But if we look at some of these standard things we could check, Democrats are currently leading the congressional generic vote by 2.4, according to Real Clear polling. That's going to be even with these two ties. So there appears to be some actual momentum towards the Republicans as of right now, based on this at least. But that's going to be with a good bit of undecideds, especially with the Qantas Insights poll here with 43-43. That's going to be 14 undecided or other. And only 2.4 at this point in time is actually somewhat concerning, because the RCP average for 2022 was 2.5, ended up being 2.8. But now, if we compare the actual things we're expected to see, RCP average of 7.3, the Democrats actually overperformed here. So that's going to be 8.4%, 7.3%. So, but the last midterms that we saw was 2022, and Republicans actually overperformed by 0.3%. So it appears that the party that is in power actually overperforms, but the party that's not in power tends to overperform, but it does completely depend on how things end up keep on going, and also some other things we can look at, such as the direction of the country margin here. As of right now, the margin is 9.9 for spread, negative, which means that about just under 10% more people say that the country's headed in the wrong direction than the right direction. And this is after the plummet right after the change of a presidency. We saw that also in 2021, and we also saw a little bit of that in 2017. Now, most of it was right here. It's right off the edge, but what I was trying to point out was what happened in 2018 and in 2022. So, as we were seeing here, and as we get to 2018, interestingly, right near the midterms, it actually was slowly going up, but it was relatively low, but the spread was about 14. When we go to 2022, that was its peak. That was actually the worst that it's ever been since RCP started tracking it, was spread of negative 57 or so, and then it plummeted right before the midterms, which ended up still being negative 42. So this one isn't as strong, as it doesn't even show who's more likely to win the presidency, but you can see that's actually slightly the worst, the second worst being in the nearing the end of Obama's first term, which he then won re-election relatively strongly after the spread went down to negative 12. So again, this isn't even that strong of an indicator as to who could end up even winning an election, as the this direction of country poll stayed relatively consistent from the end of the midterms all the way until election, right before election day, at which point it actually dropped by about 10 points. So again, it really doesn't show much about anything. It's just an interesting indicator overall. President Trump's job approval. This one we're going to be comparing to Biden, as the Democrats lost a bit in the 2022 midterms. Now, they actually did pretty well compared to how they were expected to, but you can see right off the bat, he had a positive approval, and then it got eclipsed in August. Meanwhile, for Trump, it was positive, but it already got eclipsed in March. So that's already a quicker fall than Biden had. But then it spiked, and as we got to 2022, it was right about negative 20. And then by the time that we got actually right to election day, we had negative 13. But if we check where we are right now in semi-late June, he was up by right around 10 points at this point in his presidency. Donald Trump, on the other hand, right now is polling at negative 5.1. So he's doing worse. But the question is, how did he do compared to his first term? As we can compare that to 2018, which is really what we're going to be looking at here. So what we're looking at is going to be, first off, he basically had a net positive approval for 3 weeks. And then it was negative through the entire rest of his term. It spiked right when COVID happened here. That was going to be in May into June. That's when people started getting tired of lockdown. It slowly dropped. And then right after he lost the election and right after January 6th, it absolutely spiked to negative 18 to finish off his term. So then we have, of course, here is going to be where we are in the year right now. He was at negative 16. He actually did worse. He's staying more steady this cycle. So he's doing worse than Biden, but better than he did in his first term. And so that does say a good bit about what we're going to be looking at for these midterms. Is right now we're seeing that he was at negative 13.6 on the 20th. Of course, today we don't have any 20th numbers, but for the 19th, he was at, yesterday, he was at 5.1. Biden, as of right now, I'm looking at the complete wrong year. as of right now, he was at positive 9. So that does end up showing a good bit of what might end up happening in the midterms. But as of right now, it does appear to be somewhere between 2022 and 2018. It may end up actually doing better than 2018, which would actually be a great sign for the Republican Party because 2018 was an absolute bloodbath for them. If you look in the Senate, they actually did end up gaining seats, but the only real seat that they truly gained was Florida, as Indiana and Missouri had gone very hard to the right overall nationally compared to where they were in 2012. Um, and same thing with North Dakota, but they lost Arizona, they lost Nevada. And so then also, but really what happened was in the House, they did terrible. So in 2016, it was 241 to 194, 235 to 200, 46 House seats flipped. And so that includes a redrawing of Pennsylvania. There was some redrawing, I believe, in. I'm not 100% sure. I feel like there were some other redrawings there, but a lot more seats got competitive. There were blue districts in Oklahoma and Utah, even. So all of those ended up flipping. That was a very poor year for the Republican Party. Texas got very, very close, so they made sure to draw it much safer for the 2020 cycle. But again, they did pretty poorly here, and so if they're looking for at more of a 2020 style, that they could absolutely end up surviving that as they just narrowly lost to the House, and in the Senate they did lose 2 seats, but those were both of Georgia's seats, which they actually wouldn't be losing this time around. If anything, I'd expect that the seats that would be flipping in the Senate, which we're looking at this cycle here, would maybe be Maine, but that's about it most likely. North Carolina is going to be the main one. So North Carolina would probably be the one seat that they might lose if we're looking at a 2020 style election. But the point is here that things may actually end up looking better than they did in 2018, which is a great sign for the Republican Party. So going back over to the map, Oregon is going to be safe. Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Delaware, Illinois. So they're starting off with a relatively low base, and just because we're so far out, we can't necessarily say much about these safe states other than the ones that are absolutely safe. Idaho, Wyoming, South Dakota, Oklahoma, Kansas, because Laura Kelly has again doubled down that she is not running anywhere, so that is absolutely going to be safe. Oklahoma, Arkansas, Alabama, Kentucky, South Carolina, West Virginia. And actually, I'm going to be taking back Kentucky because Andy Beshear didn't say anything. And actually, interestingly, even though it was typically because it was McConnell, this Senate seat in Kentucky generally actually gets very, very close, much closer than it should be for the state of Kentucky. 15.5 points in 2014, which was a red wave year as well. 15.5 points. In 2020, 19.5. In 2008, McConnell only won by 6, which was a blue wave year. McConnell won by, there you go, 29.5. This is more a number that you'd expect. And this was even a blue wave year, so this was a relatively strong performance. It wasn't a strong blue wave year, but this is more a number that you might expect from Kentucky, almost 30 points. But then you get into 2008, 6. But then 2014, red wave year, 15.5. 2020, he only wins by 20. So that is a potentially close seat there. And in Tennessee, Haggerty isn't necessarily a popular candidate, but he also doesn't do poorly either. He's actually an incumbent, so that one's very, very close. It's hinging on safe, but just because we're still so far out, I'm not going to be putting it in the safe categorization. I'm just going to be basically lumping everything into likely at best, again, because we are so far out. Likely is going to be Colorado to start off for the Democrats. Next is going to be New Jersey, Virginia. So these 3 states have been pretty blue. Now, interestingly, New Jersey has a strong leftward shift. If we look here, one of the strongest rightward shifts in the entire country. 1.83. Now, of course, there are some that absolutely outshine it, like Hawaii, Florida, New York, but it is fourth, if I'm correct, for the most rightward trend. So now after Ohio, North Dakota, um, so 1.83, but it is in fact still going to be a D plus 7.5 state for the next cycle. So that is enough to generally put it there. Plus, Cory Booker is going to be running for re-election. He has stated that he is not likely to lose. There's no real strong candidates in that field. So that is going to be likely Democrat. That's not going to be too competitive of a race there. Virginia, Mark Warner is a pretty strong candidate, 12.1, and that's actually on the same ballot that Joe Biden impressively won the state by just over 10. So he still overperformed a very impressive Democratic performance in Virginia. Plus, now that we do have a Republican incumbent in office, the last time that Mark Warner ran was a narrow win, and this was with Obama in office when multiple other incumbents around him lost, even in Colorado, which both of them have been trending to the left, even though Colorado was actually the most left trending state in the nation. So Virginia had a head start, but he flipped the seat in 2008 by 31, which was way outperforming Barack Obama. And this was again on the same ticket as uh, a Democratic presidential candidate. So again, he's generally an overperformer from what you might expect, so that's going to be a strong seat there. It completely depends on if Glenn Youngkin ends up hopping into that race. That's going to be much more competitive. He would still likely have an edge. It would probably go down to tilt, but still, it is going to be much more competitive if he does go into it. But as of right now, it is going to be likely because Mark Warner is a strong candidate who tends to do well in his races. John Hickenlooper is saying this is going to be his last term in office if he does win. He's said his last campaign for Senate, but he is likely to end up holding on to this seat in the, well, at least he's going to most likely win the Democratic primary, and there's literally no strong Republican candidates in the entire field. So as of right now, that's just going to be a likely seat for the Democrats, bringing their total up to 42. Likely for the Republicans, we have the states first off of Kentucky and Tennessee. Kentucky is going to be based off the weakness of this seat, as well as Andy Beshear, the Democratic governor, in theory could hop into this race. It's very, very, very unlikely, but and he's more likely actually gearing up for a presidential run in 2028, which, as I've said, is probably not a bad idea for the Democratic Party, as he has some strengths, especially in some rural areas, that could absolutely boost the Democrats and make up for some of their losses in the urban regions. But that's going to be the thing that's going to hold them off there. And Tennessee is just a general slight weakness in the Tennessee performances somewhat recently. I mean, in 2018, Marsha Blackburn only won by 10.8. And so if we're looking at something somewhat similar to that in the national environment, which is absolutely possible. Now, of course, this is a 19.9% national environment, while the polls are currently looking more at a 2.5. And if it continues going that way, it's going to be close to around 10, but still not even close to 19.9 national environment. Then it does also help that California, both candidates were Democrats, so you have to incorporate that into that number. But Marsha Blackburn only winning by 11 points. That's not the same seat. Haggerty is the incumbent as well, but still, Tennessee surprisingly does shift relatively strong when the nation does move. So that's going to be another one right there for the Republicans. Mississippi, Louisiana, these ones are just barely not strong enough. Now, Cassidy did win by a lot last time, so flipped the seat only by 12, and that was after a one round of competition there, so that was going to be a 12-point win after that, but then a full field, and he still ended up winning with 59.32% of the vote. So, and And again, they actually did get rid of that system. So now this one's just going to be straight up first past the post. So that does actually make things a bit even easier for the Republicans there, but it is just barely enough of a Republican, not enough a Republican strong state. If you look at it's 20 and a half, so I mean right around 20. So that's just going to completely depend on how things end up going. Plus, I don't even think he officially announced that he's going to run for re-election yet either. But he does also have primary challenges, so that is going to harm things there as well. That's going to weaken him. He's going to have to spend some of his war chest, so that might make things a bit easier for any challenging Democrats. Mississippi, it's actually mainly just going to be due to weak performances just across the board. 2018, Hyde Smith only won by 7.3, and then only won by 10 in 2020. So Hyde Smith appears to be a relatively weak candidate in general. But there's no real. She is, in fact, running for a second full term in office. The question is whether or not she's going to be able to, win any potential challengers here. Now, there is one challenger, but that's not really going to be much of a stand, I don't think. Nominee for Secretary of State and nominee for U.S. Senate in 2024, so he already has statewide recognition, but it is still just a relatively strong state for the Republicans. Incumbency. Then you go into Texas. Now, this one's actually going to be closer than likely right now, just because there's a lot of indecisiveness on the Republican side. So that isn't why I'm not putting it in likely. But what is going to, in fact, go into likely is going to be the state of Alaska. So, the state of Alaska, it's always been somewhat close. It's been moving to the left for a little while. The trend is 3.12. So that's going to be interesting there. But the PVI is still 11. And Sullivan did win by a relatively strong amount in 2020. Now, he has declared his reelection bid. I was reading that real quick. Mary Peltola has expressed interest, but more likely she is going to run for governor, which would make this a lot more difficult. If anything, that would mean that Nick Begich would either run for this or the at-large House seat. Or no, other Begich was the one that was the Democrat. I keep on getting those two confused. But so that's going to open that up a lot more for the Republicans, but it's just not strong enough for a Republican state to put it in safe as of right now. Montana's a very strong Republican state, but then you do still have John Tester. Typically, these sorts of these recontests don't end up working that well, but it's not Sheehy, so that might end up making things better. Plus, in 2020, Daines only won by 10 points. He's not retiring, so that makes things a bit closer here. He's not yet indicated whether he will run for re-election, but he does have quite a bit of cash on hand. If he's not going to have any challengers, that might make things difficult. Former state representative is running here. But if John Tester hops into the race, that's going to make it lean. But as of right now, it's going to be still likely. And so then we're going to be getting into lean. So right now it's 46 to 42 for the Republicans. Next up, we actually do have New Mexico, which is going to be lean. This is actually a slightly right trending state in general, but overall, the trend here is actually 4/10 of a point to the left, interestingly enough. It has moved to the left compared to the nation from 2016 to 2020 to 2024, even though the margins have generally been dropping, especially as it went down to 6 points. But it's actually been voting more to the left. It moved to the right from 2008 to 2016, but since then it has moved to the right both times. So, or to the left both times. So, if anything, now the demographics are actually relatively unfavorable, and that's mostly because it's a very uneducated state. 4.85, that's actually the lowest of any state that Joe Biden won in 2020 and any state that Kamala Harris won in 2024. So the demographics are actually not in their favor, especially now with the drop in the white minority vote disparity. So there we end up having D plus 7, almost D and a half, 7.5, but it's just barely rounding down to 7. So that's going to be D plus 7 for the state of New Mexico. Even incumbent Lujan, who is doesn't have huge name recognition, but that's actually probably going to help him if anything. He is in fact going to seek a second term, and so Dominici's also not running, who ran in 2024. Did actually somewhat poorly there compared to everything else. Heinrich ended up winning by 10.1%. So and it's actually going to be only a lean state, though, just because, again, there's not much to be able to point to say, oh, I think they're going to do well or do poorly. Next is going to be the state of Minnesota. This is just because, again, it's a general Democratic backbone state, 5.5 points for the Democrats for the PVI. It's been consistently going blue. Tina Smith is retiring, but there's really not that big of a competitive field here. There's a few, it depends on their strengths, but it really depends. Angie Craig and Peggy Flanagan have declared that they're going to run. Peggy Flanagan's most likely going to end up winning this one, but it could end up being Angie Craig. Neither of them are poor candidates by any means, so that's going to really help the Democrats there. But the Republicans also have as well somewhat strong candidates. Adam Schwartzy is not necessarily a strong candidate, but Royce White is the one who ran against Amy Klobuchar in 2024 and did the best margin against her that anyone has, only losing by 15.7. He actually got 40% of the vote. And so that right there is a relatively strong candidate, so that could actually end up helping the Republicans to close things off. But again, it's a relatively strong Democratic field, a not very strong Republican field, and a Democratic based state. So that only brings the Democrats to 44. The Republicans, 46. We're going to go to Nebraska, Iowa, Texas, Ohio, and Florida, all of those, which brings the Republicans' total up to 51, which means that they will retain control of the Senate, which is great news for Donald Trump. At this time, they are expected to maintain control of the Senate. Texas, this is an interesting one because Cornyn has a primary challenger. The last Senate election that saw an incumbent senator lose a primary and not lose the seat to the opposing party was 2010 in Utah. So that could be a bad sign. And especially with the polling here against versus Cornyn and Allred, he ends up winning, but Paxton and Allred are neck and neck. Same thing with O'Rourke. Very strong performance against O'Rourke. Meanwhile, Paxton doesn't do as well, but Paxton is winning the almost every single poll against Cornyn in the primary polls. But of course, Cornyn does have the war chest here as he is the incumbent. He is running for re-election. It completely depends on who ends up winning the primary. It could end up becoming a tilt state. But of course, that's primaries. So then at that point, you're going to get a bit more polling from the state to see the environment in the state itself, which means that most likely it's going to shift more towards the right, which means it would probably stay the same. Florida, another Republican stronghold. It has actually moved towards the right recently. One of the strongest shifts to the right in the entire country. Matter of fact, it is actually second only to Hawaii of 2.88. It is now R plus 12, which is actually the exact same as Texas. Texas is moving to the left a bit. So Florida, 2.88, R plus 12. So this is going to be a difficult one for the Democrats to hope to be able to pull off. It's down here because it's a special election. 12. This is the remainder of Marco Rubio's seat. We have an unelected incumbent here. That is going to be Ashley Moody. That was the Attorney General. And so here we do have, there's no real strong candidates here for the Democratic Party, which completely fell apart. But Josh Whale did announce he is going to run. This is relatively new. Nominee for the 6th Congressional District. He performed pretty well in that. and he also ran for Senate in 2022. He lost. He didn't even win the primary, but he did run very well against in the 6th congressional district. So the fact that he's there, that's actually a relatively strong Democratic candidate. So that actually is a good news for the Democrats, but that means that it's just not going to go likely anytime soon, as opposed to actually tightening up, because he's not a very strong candidate by any means either. And so Ashley Moody is most likely going to win this seat just because it's a very strong Republican state in general. Ohio, this is the other special election here. It's R plus 10.5. So if you actually do end up getting a scenario where the Democrats end up winning the popular vote by by 20, you could actually end up seeing this end up going blue. But it just depends on who ends up running on the Democratic side. Minority leader of the Ohio House of Representatives, but the question is Sherrod Brown and Tim Ryan. Who is going to run for this? Sherrod Brown would be the best choice here. John Husted is an unelected incumbent. And so the question is who is going to end up running on the Democratic side, and how well do they start out with? Iowa. Iowa is going to be with Joni Ernst. Okay. Joni Ernst, she actually is going to be running again. She didn't win by all too much, only 6.5 points in 2020 on the same ticket that Donald Trump won the state by 8. So she underperformed Trump there. But, of course, in her favor is the R plus 13 PVI of the state of Iowa. Very strong Republican PVI, especially recently, actually more to the right than Alaska. So that's going to absolutely help her. But the thing that might hurt is definitely going to be the field in the Democrats. Nathan Sage, Zach Walz, and J.D. Scholten, especially Nathan Sage, who actually has done relatively well. He's a relatively popular candidate amongst the Democrats. But the question is the hypothetical polling. She's only winning against the generic Democrat by 2, but again, those undecideds are going to break for the Republicans, plus it's a Democratic-aligned pollster. So all in all, that's going to be a lean race there. That's going to be an interesting one to watch as we start getting a bit closer to primary season. And finally, to finish things off in Nebraska, this is going to be Pete Ricketts versus potentially Dan Osborne, which would be a very strong showout. Most likely, he almost beat Deb Fischer 6.7 points in 2024. That was quite a bit of an overperformance from who was expected. He's a strong candidate. He's able to get Democrats, moderate Republicans, and independents, so that could help in a state like Nebraska. So that's absolutely going to Sassy, I think, retired. So that's absolutely going to help. Plus, Pete Ricketts is only an incumbent as of last year, where he won the special election. So, again, that's really not going to help him either. So, plus with the Democratic leaning national environment, which could be expected, that's going to help give a boost even more to Democratic turnout in Nebraska, who would likely then vote for Osborne. So that's going to make things a bit tight even in Nebraska. Now down to the final 5. These are going to be the ones to watch all cycle long. These are the ones that we're going to be talking about, just like the 7 main swing states from last cycle, which were Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada. The 5 main states to watch in 2026 for the Senate are going to be Michigan, Georgia, North Carolina, New Hampshire, and Maine. You better get used to hearing those states. We're going to hear them all cycle long. Start things off in Georgia. We do have Tilt Blue. This is barely going to be any. The only reason I'm going to do this is because I'm not going to leave any as toss-up. But in actuality, this is a pure toss-up race. So just purely based on chances, this is going to be about 52.5% win for Ossoff, because I'm not going to leave anything as toss-up on this map. I'm going to put it in as lean for him because he does have a narrow advantage. First off, he deseated an incumbent in Georgia in the first place, which was relatively impressive. But then going into 2026, there's no strong Republican candidates other than maybe Buddy Carter, who's probably the strongest one here. But declined were Marjorie Taylor Greene, which would have been a very easy race for Jon Ossoff, but Brian Kemp declined, which would have been a very difficult race. It actually would have been tilt red. That would have been a great flip opportunity, but he decided not to run, so that is going to leave things as much easier for Jon Ossoff. In North Carolina, this entirely comes down to whether or not previous former governor Roy Cooper ends up running. Wiki Not Nickel actually does have somewhat of a war chest right now, but this is going to be neck and neck. But as of right now, because we don't have any actual yikes, Lara Trump actually could end up primarying him, which is also another difficulty, plus the fact that you actually end up then having potential of Roy Cooper, who is beating Tom Tillis in every single poll that has been done. Now, they haven't been done in a long time, but he also is beating Lara Trump. So based on that, it almost seems, and later this month, we could end up having this decision. I will absolutely be making a video as soon as his decision is released, but until then, even then, it is still going to be, it's basically completely 50-50, but if I had to choose a side, it would be for the Democrats, because even though the state is actually an R+2 PVI, he's such a popular, he was such a popular governor, and he's still, the fact that there's already also such strong hypothetical polling in his favor, even if the incumbent loses the primary, and also the fact there is an incumbent challenger, really does show that the Democrats do definitely have a chance here, especially with the expected popular vote balance. So next we're going to go over to Michigan. Michigan is going to be a pretty close state that we're going to be watching. Oh boy. The race in Michigan. Gary Peters is retiring. The Republican primary, Mike Rogers, if he does actually end up winning, that could be very concerning for the Democrats, because Mike Rogers gave Alyssa Slotkin a run for her money in 2024, even though she was the governor, relatively popular governor, if I'm correct, of... No, she was a representative. I am thinking of Gretchen Whitmer, who is still the governor. I don't know where I got that from. She was the representative for a relatively competitive district, but Mike Rogers is a very strong candidate. So if he does end up running against whoever ends up winning the nomination, then that is actually going to be concerning. Plus the fact that there's no real strong candidates here. So just based on that alone, and the fact that Gary Peters isn't running, Gretchen Whitmer declined, which this would have been a great pick as well. Pete Buttigieg declined. So just based on the fields alone, plus the fact that the PVI in Michigan is R plus 0.5, I'm actually now going to be putting this down. As of right now, it's going to be literally absolutely neck and neck, but I'm actually going to be putting this as tilt red, which is going to be a flip, just because of the current primary fields. There's no real strong candidates here. If any of these end up making a name for themselves, then absolutely that will basically flip it immediately. If and that's not very strong. That's not a very competitive one, so it's not even like a Virginia governorship scenario. But we have a strong candidate right here. So all of these are potentially going to end up winning. Most likely, as of right now, it's going to be Mike Rogers, who would generally might end up beating any of these unless they end up making a strong name for themselves. So as of right now, it's actually going to be tilt red for the current map right now, which actually is going to be a flip for the Republicans. So now we have a trade-off here, North Carolina for Michigan. New Hampshire, again, this is going to be a toss-up race, but it's going to be tilt blue. Actually, no, this is actually going to be a tilt race, just barely. It's going to be around 60% chance for the Democrats to win this seat. Even though the incumbent is retiring, it is a blue state. It has actually been trending to the left, D+4 PVI, which isn't very strong, but look at the Democratic primary field. Chris Pappas is from the 1st Congressional District. Both of them are pretty competitive districts. They're drawn so they're both pretty competitive. So the fact that he won there, and so but the Republican primary, the main thing is that Chris Sununu and Kelly Ayotte both declined to run. So those are both going to open things up for the Democrats to be able to take this seat. He's not necessarily a very strong candidate, Pappas, but there's no strong candidates here either. So that's really going to be the main issue here for the Republicans in the state of New Hampshire. And finally, in Maine, this is going to be a tilt red seat, mainly because of incumbency. Even though this is a blue state, D+7.5 PVI, Collins won against basically all expectations in 2020. She was expected to lose, but then she won by 8, even on the same ticket that Joe Biden won Maine by almost 10. So going into 2026, this is somewhat difficult for Democrats to pick up. And the really difficult thing is that Jared Golden declined to run. This would have probably been the best shot, is that he managed to win in Maine's 2nd Congressional District. And that's a very Republican aligned district, since it actually does vote on the presidential level. We do have a PVI for that. R+8.5, which is definitely much redder than the state as a whole. But he declined to run. Now the best bet is going to be Janet Mills, but she has not announced whether or not she is going to run. So, but she is term limited, for which actually does get us a perfect segue into governors. So 53 to 47, the exact same matchup here. We are basically is going to be a swap here. Michigan for North Carolina, mostly based off of the primary fields for both parties. Next, we're going to be looking at the governors. So here we have quite a few more safe states, which is interesting because usually states are more open to electing governors that aren't of the same party that they usually vote for, but it's just because of so many there's not really many strong candidates for either party that have really gone in yet, so you just have the general bases to look at. So here we have Idaho, we have Wyoming, Nebraska, South Dakota, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, Alabama, South Carolina. Another thing about Alabama that I will point out is that term limited there. This is an interesting race because Kay Ivey is ineligible, but Tommy Tuberville, the current U.S. Senator there, is going to run. But interestingly, Doug Jones could end up running, which would be very interesting because if I'm correct, Doug Jones is the one that actually ran against Tommy Tuberville in the first place for that Senate seat. And yeah, so that would be literally a rematch of the 2020 election for the Senate here, but on the governorship. So that would be very amusing to see, but that absolutely is possible. And that would definitely tighten things up because he is literally the only Democrat that has won statewide in Alabama in quite a long time. And that's not very surprising considering the fact that it is R+29.5. So that's a safe state right there. That's going to be the one caveat to that right there. Then we go to for the and also safe is actually going to be for Vermont because even though it's a very blue state, very popular, actually the most approved governor in the entire country is Phil Scott of Vermont. He won re-election with almost 3/4 of the vote in 2024, and that was after getting 71% in 2022. Quick water break. All right, and that we're going to get to the safe Democrat states. We're going to basically just have Hawaii Maryland, Massachusetts, Rhode Island. And then looking back at these, a lot of these aren't actually able to be safe just because there's also incumbencies that are ending. So a lot of them, we can also put in Connecticut because that's also not term limited there. But all of these other states, there's either competitiveness that is basically inherent with the state or they're term limited. So that could end up opening up the field a bit more. So that's it, 18 to 11. Now, for the likely states, this is going to cover a lot of them. Oregon, California, and we're going to go over here to Colorado, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Maine. So those are going to be for the Democrats, and for the Republicans, we have Texas, Kansas, Iowa, and Alaska. So those are going to be the likely states. Maine, Janet Mills is term limited, as I said, but we don't really have any strong candidates here on either side as of right now. Angus King III is probably the strongest one for either side. Son of the current U.S. Senator Angus King. And so that's basically it for either side now. There's a lot of potential, but none of them are necessarily very strong candidates. So we're basically just going to go with the overall fact that Maine is D plus 7.5. Pennsylvania, very popular, and overperformer governor Josh Shapiro is up for re-election. He actually hasn't officially stated whether he will, but it's basically assumed that he will as of right now. And so Lieutenant Governor Austin Davis most likely is going to run for Lieutenant Governor. But Stacey Garrity, Pennsylvania State Treasurer, unknown whether or not she will run yet. Scott Martin, Doug Mastriano, who lost to Shapiro. If Mastriano runs and wins the primary, this will immediately go to a safe state. I guarantee that. He is a poor candidate choice in the first place, and so that is exactly how Shapiro ended up winning by 14.8 in 2022. So if he ends up winning and running and winning, then that will immediately make it a safe state. Meanwhile, you have a few other people who are in that field. None of them are necessarily very strong. And so really you have likely, which I completely agree with, very strong candidate there. There's no real competition. Illinois, very strong blue state. J.D. Pritzker is running for re-election. There is no term limit in Illinois. He has expressed interest, but he's not officially said whether or not he is running, but basically that's presumptive. He's expected to officially announce it by next month. And there's not really any strong Republican candidates here. So this basically is just going to be a race carrying away. But Illinois, D plus 12, it's moving to the right. So it's going to be a bit more competitive than it might have been in previous years. Yet he's relatively popular. He might even be gearing up for a presidential run. Who knows? But that's going to be Illinois. Minnesota, vice presidential candidate Tim Walz is running for re-election. And so he's not saying whether or not he will do so, but interestingly enough, no Minnesota governor has been elected to a third term. So that's going to be interesting there, but most likely he's going to announce some point this summer. I'd be surprised if, don't know what on earth that was. I'd be surprised if he doesn't run. But here we don't have necessarily any strong candidates right now who have officially announced. But most likely the strongest candidate, there's no real strong, most likely the strongest candidate would be Brad Kohler because you have Hennepin County, which is a Democratic stronghold county. And so that's it's the most populous county in Minnesota. That's going to be a stronghold there. That's going to get a lot of Republican votes out of a typically Democratic area. So, but as of right now, it is going to absolutely be likely blue. Colorado, again, left trending state. However, term limited. Michael Bennett is going to be running, current U.S. Senator. So he's most likely going to carry himself over there. So that's going to be basically it. Republican primary, there's no real strong candidates here. So it's almost the exact same thing. The only reason is that it's likely is because it's term limited. Oregon, they do not elect their governors by very strong margins. Kotek only won by 3.4%. She's eligible to run, but has not said whether or not she'll do so. So that is going to completely depend on that. But there's literally not, there's no strong Republican candidates as of right now. So again, we're going to go back to the overall PVI, which is D plus 16, which is actually even bluer than New York, interestingly enough. So that's going to be a likely blue race right there. California, Gavin Newsom is term limited. So over a dozen candidates have already declared a campaign. This is a heck of a lot of candidates here. Potential Kamala Harris. There has definitely been a lot of talk that Kamala Harris may end up running. If she does, she would most likely absolutely just win the Democratic primary. On the Republican side, we have quite a few here. If Harris runs, he said he is going to run. That's an interesting caveat, but yeah, there's a lot of candidates here. It's gonna probably shrink out a bit, and then the top two are gonna run, but I'd be surprised if it's not two Democrats, because that's typically how things end up going. Newsom beat a recall election in 2021, and in 2018 he was elected his first term, but actually no, Republicans end up typically making it to the general. Okay, so most likely, this is just going to be based off of the fact that it is a blue state. The PVI is D plus 22.5. It's not moving very hard to the right, half a point. But that is still going to be a pretty interesting 22.5 points for the Democrats. So just based off of that, we can say that's going to be a likely state. Moving on to lean. Here we have Ohio. This is Governor DeWine is term limited. And so declared as Vivek Ramaswamy, he is currently likely to win this currently he is most likely to win the primary. But then we go down to the Democrats. The question is whether or not Tim Ryan or Sherrod Brown will hop into the race. It might actually flip to tilt blue if either of them do. The best case scenario would, again, as I said, be Tim Ryan running for governor and Sherrod Brown running for Senate. That is mainly because Tim Ryan lost in the Senate, but Sherrod Brown has already been a senator. So you want to have the guy who's already won a Senate race to run for Senate, and have the guy who still has statewide name recognition to run for the smaller office. But Tim Ryan is likely to announce by this summer, which again I will be making a video about if that decision comes, whether or not he is going to run. But Sherrod Brown would win if he does announce his candidacy in the overall field here. But based on that alone, we can't really say too much. It is still a right trending state, believe it or not. 9/10 of a point to the right. R plus 10.5. So that is going to be lean Republican state. The next one's going to be Nevada. This one's not going to be a lean state by much. It's going to be right around 65% chance, but that's mainly because there's no real strong candidates on the Democratic side. And they also have a relatively popular incumbent, Joe Lombardo. He is running for a re-election, and so the Democratic primary, there is no real strong candidates. Now, the Attorney General is in fact running, but if Steve Sisolak runs again, that would be a huge problem. If he does actually end up winning, then it would be completely over for the Democrats, as these rerun elections never end up going that well for the person who lost the first time. I did not mean to do that. And so Aaron Ford, is actually already losing by a lot here, but only 412 registered voters here, and it was a long time ago. So, um, yeah, that doesn't hold up that much, but the fact is that there's no real strong Democrats here that are challenging Lombardo, so he is mostly going to cruise to re-election. And then in Florida, this is just a Republican strong state now. It has been for a little while. R plus 12. So, with R plus 12 PVI, Ron DeSantis is term limited, so that means that the Democrats have a shot, period. But Um, if Casey DeSantis ends up running, then it basically completely disappears. So, but if Matt Gaetz ends up running and somehow winning, then you're going to end up with a much more competitive race. Neither of these are necessarily very strong candidates. The Democratic primary, there's no real strong candidates either. David Jolly isn't a poor candidate either, but he did switch parties, so he may be able to gather some more Republican support, I guess is the idea there. But there's no real strong Democratic contestant either, so that's going to make things a bit difficult. And finally, in New Hampshire, we have current incumbent governor Kelly Ayotte. I don't know where the Kevin came from. Kelly Ayotte is going to be running for re-election. She hasn't said whether or not she'll do so, but the Democratic primary, there's literally not really anybody there. So there's no real field here. I mean, this entire page is 1.5 screens tall. So there's really no information out there right now. She's a very popular incumbent, even though New Hampshire is D+4. It's still just a popular Republican incumbent. They typically elect Republicans as governor. Except lean states. New York, yes, New York is lean. New York, D+14, but yeah, Kathy Hochul is not a very popular governor. She only won by 6.5 in 2022 to begin with, and now she is still doing relatively poorly. And so now it was the closest New York gubernatorial election since 1994. She announced she is going to run for re-election. Poor approval ratings. So she is actually being challenged by the lieutenant governor, Antonio Delgado. So the question is whether or not he will end up de-seating her. Actually, may end up doing pretty well. Zohran Mamdani wins the 2025 New York City Democratic mayoral primary. That's an interesting caveat as well. But the Republicans don't necessarily have anyone strong unless Mike Lawler runs, which most likely that decision coming next month. So if he does end up running, if Stefanik ends up running, even if McCaughey ends up running potentially, then you could end up having an even tighter race. But as of right now, she is the incumbent. The state is definitely blue leaning, so lean blue on the map here. New Mexico is going to be lean. This is another term limited governor, so that's going to be the Lujan Grissom. There's no real strong candidates here. Again, it's the same sort of story. No real strong candidates, no shoutouts. So we're just going to be going on with the fact that it's D+7 on the PVI. And so that Grisham won by 6.5. And prior to that, Grisham won by 14.5. So that's really just going to be the fact here. Is going to be lean again, just like it was on the Senate. Lean blue state in general. All right, and then we have the 4 main competitive ones. These I would not be surprised, along with New York, New Hampshire, Nevada, maybe Ohio, are going to be the ones that we're going to be looking at all cycle long. So these are going to be the very competitive ones: Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Georgia. So first off, Gretchen Whitmer is term limited. Mike Duggan is an independent. That's potential spoiler candidate here. But declared, there's no real strong candidates other than maybe Gilchrist, who's currently the lieutenant governor. But Andy Levin might also run. Not necessarily a very strong candidate here either. But Gary Peters isn't running. Pete Buttigieg isn't running. So neither of those are happening there. John James, if he does end up running, that could make things very, very close. But as of right now, It is a Democratic held seat. It's only D plus 0.5. Um, John James has declared his candidacy. So, but Mike Duggan, it doesn't necessarily say much about what's going on here. So, John James does actually lose to Jocelyn Benson, but Gilchrist actually loses to John James. So this is actually looking like the most likely matchup as of right now. So based on that, we actually do have a flip for the Republicans, which would be huge. Michigan is going to go tilt red, but as of right now, it's just a pure toss-up. But just for this, I'm going to put it in as tilt red. Wisconsin, this one's actually tilt blue. That's not a toss-up that I'm just categorizing tilt blue. That is actually probably about 50, that's probably about 60% chance of a win for current Governor Tony Evers. Now, this is actually interesting because, if he does happen to win, this would be the first time that a governor got to a third term in a while. So he has not said whether or not he will do so yet, but he's very likely to. There's no real competition here. I bet you that all these are gonna immediately drop out as soon as if he is likely does announce his candidacy. And there's no real strong candidates here, interestingly enough. If Eric Hovde runs, though, then that would tighten things up a good bit because he did do relatively well in the Senate, but Evers won by 3.4% in 2022. And he also narrowly flipped it in 2018 by 1.1 versus incumbent Governor Walker. So he did very, very well there. He's likely to win this seat, so that is going to be the current state of affairs right now. Brian Kemp is term limited in Georgia, segueing right into Georgia. Brian Kemp is term limited. So now Chris Carr, Georgia Attorney General, Marjorie Taylor Greene, if she ends up running and winning, then things would be very poor for the Republicans. They'd likely lose, but nobody's really. There's also no strong candidates right now for the Democrats. If Stacey Abrams runs, then it's basically over. But there's no real strong candidates for the Democrats. There's no extremely strong candidates for the Republicans. So as of right now, we're just going to go with the fact it's literally an R plus 0, just about 1/4, R plus 1/4 for that, and it's already a Republican held office. So this is like basically the most toss-up-y toss-up there is on the map, but we're going to put it in as Republican hold for right now. And then finally, Arizona. We do have incumbent Katie Hobbs. She's not saying whether or not she will run again. But she is likely to again. Andy Biggs is running. This is going to be a pretty competitive race, though. So, but Karen Taylor Robson, candidate for governor in 2022, already lost. This would be a bad choice for the Republican Party, as again, those rematches never go well. But and also she lost the thank goodness that Carrie Lake isn't running, because if she did and then ran again, she would absolutely lose by quite a strong amount. But if you go down to the hypothetical polling here, you have Andy Biggs is winning by quite a bit in all three of those. Those were quite old, but again, there's no information on war chest or anything right now, so that is definitely going to we're just going to have to wait on the candidates right now. If you look at the general hypothetical polling here, Katie Hobbs versus Andy Biggs, she wins most of them and also wins most of them against Taylor Robson, but there's a lot of undecideds. And Arizona is the most Republican of all of the presidential swing states, R plus 3.5. It is the most left trending out of all of them, though, except for Georgia, trending to the left by 2.03 points. It actually basically stayed stagnant between 2020 and 2024, though, going from 4.16 points to the right of the nation to 4 points to the right of the nation. So that is a potential flag for the Democrats here. But she is the incumbent. She narrowly pulled off a win. But she's also a very poor performer, because the fact that she managed to just barely win against Carrie Lake, who was a very unpopular person in Arizona in general, and also in a worse popular environment in 2024, Ruben Gallego beat Lake by 2.5. So that just goes to show that she's actually also a pretty poor performer in general. So if anything, this is probably another flip for the Republicans. Tilt red. This is basically a pure toss-up, a 52.5% chance win for the Republicans. So if anything, the Republicans are expecting to hold on to exactly their numbers in the Senate and flipping to Senate or flipping to governorship. So things are looking fantastic for the Republicans right now. As of right now for the 2026 midterms. This was a long one, but thank you all so much for watching today's video. Make sure to subscribe if you are not already, and I'll be coming with more videos. I'm changing the schedule to every other day for right now until things start heating up more for the election season. Thank you again so much for watching. Have a fantastic rest of your day.